Morning, everyone. Welcome to another Dhamma session here with Empty Cloud Monastery. So this morning I'll be reading a couple short verses from the Dhammapada. So a few years back I had translated the entire Dhammapada, and these days I'm revising the translation in preparation for publication. So I'll share over the next few sutta study sessions. I'll be sharing a few selected Dhammapada verses that I particularly like, and we can have some discussion about it. So today I'll be reading out two of the verses from the first chapter of the Dhammapada, so verses number 7 and 8. So these are from the chapter of the pairs, which is the first chapter of the Dhammapada, which mostly takes the form of matching pairs. So two separate verses that are directly related. So usually one is the positive formulation and the other is the negative formulation. So this verse, I'll read it first in English, and then I'll go through and talk a bit about the Pali terms being used, and also a bit about how to apply this to our practice. So we can start by paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll start going through the Dhammapada verses. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, as mentioned, I'll be reading from my translation of the Dhammapada verses number 7 and 8. So these verses say, if one focuses on beauty, lacks sense restraint, does not know the right amount when eating, is lazy and lacks energy, Mara subdues such a person just as the wind subdues a weak tree. So that's verse 7. And verse 8 says, if one does not focus on beauty, has good sense restraint, knows the right amount when eating, has faith, and has persistent energy, Mara does not subdue such a person, just as the wind does not subdue a stone mountain. So as with so many of the Dhammapada verses, these are quite short, straightforward, but there's a tremendous amount of content packed in a few words. So I'd like to go through this in a bit more detail. So first off, the first line, translated here as if one focuses on beauty. The Pali for this is subhanupasing viharantang. So viharantang means living or dwelling, and it has the implication of how you keep your mind. Like what's the dwelling state of your mind? What's the normal resting condition of your mind? Subha means beauty. And anupasti means to regard or to pay attention to or to look at or to contemplate or consider. So subhanupasing viharantang, it means someone who spends most of their time fixating on beautiful things, fixating on what's attractive. And so beauty here, of course, doesn't just mean the physical beauty of other people's bodies. Of course, that's the most obvious meaning and definitely one of the meanings here. But also it has the connotation of constantly fixating on what's appealing what's pleasant, what's desirable. Constantly fixating on objects of attachment. Constantly fixating on things that we're likely to get obsessed with. Things that will consume the mind with attachment, clinging, desire, obsession. These are the sorts of things that we would call beautiful, things that when you fixate on them, they produce desire and attachment. So someone who is fixating on subha, who's fixating on beauty. So what happens when you fixate on beautiful things? When you're constantly pointing your mind towards what you find beautiful or pleasant or appealing or attractive? Well, then what happens is your desire and your attachment increase, and therefore your suffering increases, and you get farther away from awakening. It's also quite notable that generally speaking, the people who have the most difficult time in Buddhist practice are the ones with the strongest greed, the strongest tendency to fixate on the beautiful and the pleasant things in life. And the reason for this is because if one doesn't have a deep understanding of dukkha, the first noble truth, then it's very difficult to have motivation for practicing Buddhism. It's very difficult to have motivation for getting deep into the cultivation of samadhi and wisdom. So if one is always fixating on beauty, then one is inclined to, if you are a Buddhist, maybe inclined just to make merit once in a while and maybe visit the temple every now and then, but not really interested in doing deep meditation practice, not really interested in studying the Buddhist teachings, not really interested in changing the way we live our lives, possibly not even much interested in practicing morality, but rather mostly just focused on trying to pursue the pleasant things in life, trying to pursue attractive people and fun experiences and having nice decorations in your home and a nice everything as much as possible. So the Buddha here is pointing to the danger of always fixating on what's appealing. And the second line here, translated as lacking sense restraint. In Pali, this is indriyesu asangvutang. So your indriyas are your sensory abilities, your sense faculties. And asangvuta literally means not restrained. So not being restrained in one's senses. So similarly, the way the Buddha defines sense restraint is when you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, or think something, don't obsess about it. Don't fixate on it. So just recognize it as something impermanent, which comes and goes, and recognize that reacting to that sensory experience with desire or aversion is simply going to generate more suffering. It's not going to do us any good. So sense restraint doesn't mean shutting off our sensory experiences, but rather it means regarding our sensory experiences with non-attachment. So regarding our sensory experiences with a certain distance, a certain self-restraint. So restraining ourselves from constantly chasing after the pleasant and fleeing the unpleasant, but always keeping a stable and steady mind, aware of the impermanent and unsatisfying nature of attachment to any experience. Then the next line, in Pali, it's Bojanam hi chamatanyung, which in the English translation says, does not know the right amount when eating. So bojana is literally means eating, so it refers to food. So bojana also has the meaning of enjoying or making use of. So its most common usage refers to eating, but it also has the meaning of making use of any object or any resource. And it also has this meaning of enjoying something, of getting lost in something, getting lost in the enjoyment of an experience. And knowing the right amount in Pali is mattanyo. So matta means the measure, the right amount of something. So not knowing the right amount when eating. So this might mean that you eat too much, or it might mean that you eat too little. It might mean that you eat too much of the wrong things and not enough of the right things. So it indicates an imbalanced approach to eating. So this is commonly translated as moderation in eating. But the English word moderation has an implication of reduction. Like moderation means eating, maybe eating less than you want to. But we also need to watch out for the opposite of not eating enough. So not properly taking care of and nourishing our body so that it can be strong and healthy. So a strong and healthy body is a support to our spiritual practice. So we want to make some effort to keep the body alive and healthy. And the proper use of food is one way that we do that. And the broader meaning of the word bhojana, so making use of things. So this also means everything that we use in our lives. We want to use it in the appropriate way, in the appropriate measure. So the right amount, in a way that supports the development of our spiritual qualities. So we always want to relate to everything in our life in terms of one basic question. When I do this, does the wholesome increase or decrease? So we should always be trying to structure our relationship to the objects and activities in our life in such a way that our wholesome mind states increase and our unwholesome tendencies decrease. Then the next line here, so kusitang hina viryang in Pali. So kusita means lazy. Virya is energy, and hina literally means discarded, thrown away. But it has the implied meaning of inferior or lacking. So kusita, lazy, and hina virya, so having inferior energy or an insufficient energy. So this is not laziness in the sense of, for example, not wanting to go to the office and do your work, or lazy in the sense of not wanting to do overtime at your job. That's not the kind of lazy the Buddha is talking about. But rather, he's talking about laziness in the development of the mind. For example, here at the monastery, we have a substantial portion of several hours in the afternoon, which are marked personal practice time. Well, what do you do with that time? Are you spending it wisely? Are you using it in ways that develop wholesome mind states? So doing some meditation, doing some study, going for a walk, perhaps. Can rest a bit if you need to, if that's supportive for you. But if it's not, then don't waste your time. So laziness then means thinking, oh, I have plenty of time, maybe I'll go and read a novel. Or, oh, I have plenty of time, I'll scroll endlessly through Facebook. Oh, I have plenty of time, I'll binge watch that series I always wanted to finish. So this is laziness in Dhamma. So that's what the Buddha is talking about. And actually, one can use an over-dedication to mundane work and mundane activities as a way of being lazy in Dhamma. It's like, well, I'll just spend a few extra hours working on these Excel spreadsheets rather than doing some meditation and reading some suttas. Well, you might say, oh, I'm being diligent in doing my office work. And, well, it's technically true. But that's laziness in Dhamma, because it's using mundane work as a way of evading our true work, which is the work of developing our spiritual qualities. And the issue of hina virya, so having inferior energy, or lack of energy. Again, the application of energy in the development of the mind. So it's possible also to be taking on the outward form of spiritual practice, but not be developing the inward activity. So over the years, I've met many people who, on the outside, it looks like they're meditating, but you start asking questions and it pretty quickly becomes clear that they're not meditating at all. I still remember a few years ago on retreat, there was a person who came in for meditation consultation. So we were talking a bit and I was asking what they were doing with their meditation practice. And this is a person who'd been coming for years to the meditation programs. And the person eventually revealed that actually they don't meditate at all. So they sit down when it's time to sit down, and then they daydream until the bell rings. And they were telling me that, actually with a certain degree of pride, that they're able to maintain up to 4 or 5 different parallel storylines at the same time in their mind. And just wasting time. Like, it's not doing anything remotely related to meditation practice. It's just creating stories to inhabit in their mind while they wait for the bell to ring. Honestly, I don't know why this person was even coming to meditate in the first place. And in fact, they eventually stopped coming entirely, which is not too much of a surprise. If you're not deeply interested in meditation, then meditation programs eventually lose their appeal. But this is an example of, again, having the outward form of spiritual practice, but not actually putting any effort into it. Or another example is many people, they go and they sit down in the meditation hall, and then they just let their mind go blank. They just let the mind blur out into this kind of vague, spacey dullness. And then an hour later, the bell rings and they get up and go and do whatever they're doing. But that doesn't really accomplish anything. Like, if you're not putting any effort into doing your meditation practice, if you're not at least putting forward the basic minimum effort of staying awake, then you're just wasting your time. So what we're doing in Buddhist practice is we're applying effort in the right way, in the proper way. So the appropriate effort of constantly directing the mind towards the Dhamma, constantly making some effort to increase our wholesomeness and decrease our unwholesomeness. And sometimes the effort that's necessary actually is just to stay awake and still. That alone is a application of effort which leads towards awakening, which leads towards enlightenment. So just to stay awake and still. That is an application of energy. It's not a waste of time, as long as we persist in that. So, and then the Buddha gives this metaphor. He says, Mara subdues such a person, just as the wind subdues a weak tree. So this also is quite lovely imagery. So if you've ever seen a strong windstorm, and you'll see it'll bend a small tree, it'll bend it all the way over, sometimes to the point where the tree will snap and topple. So in the same way, you can imagine how when our practice is very weak in this way, we're always focusing on the beautiful and attractive things. We're not making any effort to restrain our senses, so we're always getting distracted and caught up in sensory experiences. We don't have a healthy relationship with food, so we're always eating too much or eating too little, or chasing out the fun and pleasant foods rather than the healthy foods. We're lazy in our practice, so we're not making an effort to train our minds. Then the forces of Mara, so all the temptations of the world, will just knock us over, like a hurricane knocking over a small tree. And also, you might have seen, again, when there's these strong winds, the tree gets twisted and shaken and thrown this way and that, and the leaves get torn off and the branches get torn off. So that's also our experience. When we don't develop this strong and stable presence of mind, then we're constantly getting battered and knocked around by the experiences of the world. We're constantly being thrown off balance and torn apart by all the experiences that we have. And then the Buddha gives the positive formulation of this. So he says, if one does not focus on beauty, so asubhanupasing vaharantang. So other translators have sometimes taken this to mean fixating on ugliness or practicing the meditation on unattractiveness. But I think that's missing a more direct and simple way of taking this. So the prefix a is a negation. So subhanupasing means fixating on beauty, focusing on attractive things. So subhanupasing, not fixating on beauty, not focusing on attractive things. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you need to instead fixate on ugly things or fixate on the unattractiveness of the world, the repulsive nature of the world. But rather it just means not putting any extra attention on beautiful things, not putting any extra attention on attractive things, but rather having an impartial mind, a mind which is not influenced by that which is beautiful or ugly, that which is appealing or repulsive. And I think this is much closer to the implied meaning of this passage. So it's not about intentionally focusing either on beauty or on ugliness, but rather it's about cultivating an impartial mind which is not affected by the experiences that one is having. Similarly, he says one has good sense restraint, knows the right amount when eating. So I mentioned those in detail before. Then he says has faith, so saddha in Pali. And this is interesting because here we see where every other part of these passages, the linked pairs are very clearly opposites of each other. For example, lacking sense restraint is put opposite to having good sense restraint. Not knowing the right amount is set opposite to knowing the right amount. But here in the negative formulation, we had lazy, and in the positive formulation, we have faith. So this is not necessarily immediately apparent what the Buddha is pointing to here, and that they're not obviously opposites of each other. But think a bit more deeply about this. If you genuinely have faith in Buddha and Dhamma, then you're not going to be lazy. If you have strong faith in the Buddha, if you have strong faith in the Dhamma, then you're going to take the Dhamma very seriously, and you're going to make a sincere effort to follow the path of the Buddha. So of course you're not going to be lazy if you have strong faith. And similarly is mentioned here also having persistent energy. So there's this connection here between faith and energy. If you have genuine faith in the Buddha's teachings, then you will put forth sincere, ongoing, persistent energy in practicing the teachings as best you can. And the Buddha concludes with the second simile. He says, Mara does not subdue such a person, just as the wind does not subdue a stone mountain. So here also, again, you have hurricane winds knocking over the trees, and tearing off the leaves and branches and throwing them all around. But the mountains are completely unmoved. The mountains are not the least bit bothered or disturbed by the wind, no matter how strong the wind gets. So it's the same with our mind, with our practice. If we practice sincerely in the way that the Buddha is describing, then we have the steadiness, the imperturbability of a stone mountain. So no matter how strong the hurricane gets, no matter how difficult the experience is life throws at us, we will be unbothered. We will be uninfluenced, undisturbed. We'll remain steady and focused in our practice. So again, just a few short words on these short verses. So the Dhammapada is possibly the most famous, most well-read, most well-loved collection of the Buddha's teachings. But it's also often misunderstood. So these short passages are meant to be understood within the context of the rest of the suttas. So it's important to not just read the Dhammapada, but also to read all of the other suttas in order to fully understand and appreciate the meaning of the Dhammapada. So hopefully today I've been able to help you have a bit more appreciation for the depth of these Dhammapada verses. And as mentioned, I'll continue to go through a few selected verses over the next several sutta study sessions. And at this time, if you have any questions or comments, I'll take your questions and comments as best I can. Thank you. So I see many friends have been joining in online. So hello to everyone who's joining in. Michael, Geeta, Anita, Mike, Samang, Jayanta, Nawang, Amneris, good to see you. Just saw Amneris in Italy a couple of weeks ago. Hello, Sam, Raman, Amaranta, Patricia, Elaine, Sud, and others. So let's see if there's any questions in here. So I see a few kind comments, so thank you for your kind words. And I do see one question here from Sud. Sud asks, can unwholesome be seen as repulsive instead of being equanimous to it? Yes, but you do need to be careful. So rather than seeing unwholesome things, so unwholesome mind states or activities, instead of seeing them as repulsive, it's better to see them as dangerous. The same way that if you see a poisonous snake, conjure up all the loving kindness in your heart, see it as just a natural part of the world, which has just as much right to live as any other being, just as much place in the world as everything else, and keep your distance from it. Or just as if you see a fire, you can appreciate the fact that fire is part of reality, but you don't go and stick your hand in it. Or if you see a bottle of poison, so bleach, you walk in the laundry room and you see a bottle of bleach. You're like, oh yeah, bleach. Bleach is part of laundry rooms, but I'm not going to drink it. So in the same way, you recognize unwholesome things as being a part of reality. You recognize unwholesome things as being an inescapable fact of samsara, but we recognize them as dangerous and we choose not to get anywhere close to them. We choose not to touch them or engage with them in any way. So it's always dangerous to develop repulsion towards anything, because repulsion is a form of aversion. It's a form of unwholesome mind state. So cultivating repulsion towards unwholesome states is actually itself unwholesome. So that you want to be a little bit careful there, because it's an example of something which on the surface seems to be a good idea, but you're actually feeding your own defilements when you do that. For example, many years ago, I knew a monk who had a real problem with attachment to food, attachment to pleasant foods in particular. So at one point, he took on a practice of viewing food as disgusting, viewing food as blood and urine and so on. So like intentionally viewing it as disgusting. And you could see it on his face. On his face, when he looked at food, he had this look of hatred. So was he counteracting his attachment to food? Yeah, he was. But he was also cultivating hatred, which is not wholesome either. So instead, you want an impartial mind which sees things clearly and is not influenced towards either desire or aversion. Then Sud asks, can you comment on how to keep loving kindness in extremely stressful situations? Seems like anger has a way of just taking over the mind. Yeah, so the most important thing is to practice loving kindness meditation every day, and try to keep loving kindness in your mind. Try to keep an attitude of gentleness and friendliness in your mind all the time. So don't wait until things get difficult. Try to keep it all the time. So always developing and cultivating this gentleness, kindness, friendliness of mind all the time. Then when you encounter difficult situations, it will be easier to maintain your metta because you've already have it very well protected. And in very stressful situations, again, it depends upon what in particular makes it stressful. So if it's other people that are making it stressful, well, it's good to remember that most people are really struggling on the inside. No matter how good they look on the outside, most people on the inside, they're really struggling with depression and confusion and hopelessness, and a sense of deep dissatisfaction. Most people are really struggling with dukkha. And because they're struggling, they tend to be a little bit difficult to get along with. So try to have some compassion. Recognize that the reason why it's hard to get along with these people is because they're having a hard time getting along in samsara. And when somebody is really caught in their own struggle, it's often hard for them to see the negative effect they're having on other people. If it's stressful situations not connected to a particular person, well, then also it's important to look at your own mind. Why are you perceiving it as stressful? Are you expecting something unrealistic from the situation? Do you have some kind of desire for a particular outcome or a particular experience? Well, if so, then recognize that it's your own expectations that are making it stressful. So try to relax and recognize that ultimately the outcome of the situation doesn't matter. What matters is keeping your serenity and purity of mind. It doesn't really matter so much what direction things go in, as long as you keep your own mind stable and pure. Then Anita asks a question, and I'm not quite sure what this means. She says, would you say the energy that combines with faith is the path, the Noble Eightfold, and it is woven through the faith? Well, I mean, faith is one of the 5 spiritual powers. So one of the things that the Buddha says is necessary for making significant progress on the path. And as I was saying earlier, faith is also a necessary component for energy. If you don't have faith in Buddha and Dhamma, then it's hard to understand the value of putting forth effort. But also the more you practice, then the more your faith grows. So the more effort you put into the practice, then the more you recognize the efficacy of the practice, and therefore the more confidence and faith you have in the practice. And therefore the more confidence and faith you have in Buddha and Dhamma. So yeah, I would say that faith and practice are inseparably linked. So these are not things to be seen as separate from each other. They're things which are mutually supportive. They develop each other. And that's the last question from online. Any questions from the monastery residents? No? Okay. So I think that's it for this morning. So thank you all for joining in. So you can join in again this evening for meditation and Dhamma talk, and again tomorrow. So tomorrow morning we'll again have sutta study, and tomorrow evening we'll have monk chat with Master Jian Hu. So one of the senior Chan monks from the Taiwanese tradition. So please feel free to bring questions to share with Master Jian Hu, and we'll hopefully have a lively discussion about Chan Buddhism, its relationship with Theravada Buddhism, and how to apply the methods and practices found therein. So we'll end the morning with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.